What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? Today, I'm going to be talking with Progressive Liberal about Trump and his anti-LGBTQ practices that he's had since being in office. And we really wanted to highlight this. Progressive Liberal actually wrote and did all of the research for this, so I really thank him for bringing this to me. And Progressive Liberal, do you want to introduce yourself, tell people where they can find you?
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. I am Ethan, the Progressive Liberal. You can find me at youtube.com/Progressive Liberal. You can get me on Twitter at ProLibShow. And I like to talk about politics and atheism and Star Trek and all kinds of fun stuff.
And apparently Star Wars.
And Star Wars. Yeah. Pew pew.
All right, so if you heathens are interested in how exactly anti-LGBT the Trump administration has been and Trump himself, then please stay tuned. All right, so the first item on our docket here is the actual Trump administration removing all references to the LGBTQ community from the website. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
So the Trump administration has an issue because they've pandered to evangelicals so much that LGBTQ people can't be a part of their platform, somebody that they project out to. At the same time, they don't want people on the LGBTQ people or on the LGBTQ side who might support Trump to be forgotten about. So their solution is just remove all references to LGBTQ, and then we won't have to talk about it.
Wow. So just remove all the references. That
Sure,
seems
just
like...
pull them all out, pretend that they don't exist, and then we don't have an issue.
I don't know. I feel like you have an even bigger issue at that point to not even recognize that entire demographic, really. I don't know. I think that was probably a bad move.
Yeah, I think it's an awful move. You know, the Republican Party as a whole has an issue of shrinking demographics, and by cutting out swaths of the population, they aren't able to grow themselves.
Right. And it seems like the Human Rights Campaign even condemned the removal of all of this, in a statement just after this occurred, right?
Yep, absolutely. And rightly so. I mean, how can you just ignore that a bunch of Americans exist?
Yeah, I don't know. But it seems like this right here, which I'm not sure when this happened, how far into his presidency this happened, but it must have happened fairly quickly, right?
It was pretty shortly afterwards. It was... I want to say it was the first month of his administration.
Mm-hmm. And I'm reading here that Secretary John Kerry, is it Kerry? Mm-hmm. that was secretary at the time, and he even issued an apology, didn't he?
Yes. John Kerry was like, I don't know what this guy is doing. Yeah.
And it's weird. Apparently, they didn't use the Q in LGBTQ. They only used LGBT, right?
Right. So in their defense, which it's the only one they get, traditionally on the government websites, they've only used LGBT because it used to be GLBT and then it got switched to LGBT. So that's been the traditional way that the government has recognized it. But in this day and age, to just leave the Q off is a blatant dog whistle at this point.
Yeah, I would have to say so. Just as my final thoughts for this particular topic, I think that they shouldn't have removed any mention of the LGBTQ community on the website, and I feel like it's very telling for the entire administration. As far as where their mindset is, I'm wondering, Absolutely. What do you think?
No, I totally agree. It's a tragedy. That's the only word that I can think of. It's a tragedy that their solution to the problem is to ignore that a bunch of Americans exist and have needs.
Right. Now, the second one on the list is the Trump administration aiming to erase all rights for transgender people. And, this has actually been something that's cropped up several times in his administration. I think the most recent thing was actually banning transgender people from the military. And so you want to tell me a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so the again, it's about not recognizing trans people as existing. So their idea is this: if we can deny that trans people exist, that it's an actual condition that that is medically recognized, then we don't have to give money to to organizations that support trans people. We don't have to support trans people in the military getting HRT, that sort of thing. So the more things that you can erase and not recognize it as being a medical condition, the more money you can save, apparently.
Right. And apparently in a memo, they wanted to define gender as a specific thing. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So they called for gender to be defined, and I'm reading here, as a biological, immutable condition determined by genitalia at birth.
See, that just seems scientifically illiterate to me.
Doesn't it though? Because okay, so there is no physical way to recognize, for instance, depression. There's no physical way to recognize anxiety. There's no physical way to recognize PTSD. Yet there are still conditions which exist. So gender dysphoria can't be recognized by something physical. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not some weird thing in medical science or behavioral science, I guess I should say. So to just erase it from existence by saying, well, the only thing that gender can be recognized with is the genitalia that somebody had at birth, is completely ignoring the issue.
And, Trump seems to always want to put out this whole idea that he's very pro-LGBT. But so far, I mean, we've discussed how blatantly anti-LGBTQ he actually is. So, I mean, this particular wanting to define gender as the genitalia that you're born with doesn't exactly seem like he's pushing a pro-LGBTQ stance, does it?
No, it doesn't. And my question would be, why does it need a definition at all? Why can't it just be what somebody feels? How do non-binary people even fit into this? They don't. And that's because their solution is to pretend that non-binary people don't exist.
Right. And I feel like that's a great disservice to the whole demographic. And for a public figure like the president to do this, I think is a pretty big slap in the face to just the general public, right?
Absolutely. It's embarrassing. I don't want to be associated with that. I have a cousin who is trans. Do they just not exist now?
Well, I mean, obviously not. President Trump doesn't think so. But, his 3 previous marriages definitely exist.
Right, yeah.
So this leads us into the next point here, and that's when the Trump administration actually removed LGBTQ categories from the 2020 census.
Yeah, so instead there's a question asking if couples are in a same-sex or opposite-sex relationship, which does a couple of things. It completely ignores gender. It gives non-binary Americans no opportunity to properly identify themselves. And it identifies the relationship that you're in instead of the person that you are. Again, it just disenfranchises people to follow this agenda that trans people don't exist.
Right. And, this is odd coming up because, Trump actually wanted to add a citizenship question on the 2020 census, and that was actually revoked. So I'm glad they didn't do that, but it seems like, they would have kept the LGBTQ question.
Right. So in their perfect census, there is no LGBTQ. There's no way for LGBTQ people to identify themselves. But people who might not be citizens could identify themselves. There's an agenda here.
Yes, there definitely is. And I mean, every point that we kind of go through here really shows the direction that the Trump presidency wants to go in. And it's very anti-LGBTQ.
Absolutely. Also, I'm going to be doing an entire video on the census next week, and about how the census works and why including questions like this are really, really important.
Ah, I can't wait to watch that. 'Cause, I mean, I love all of your videos. I actually used your fetal heartbeat video in a comment to somebody. So I'm definitely using your content to explain shit to people.
I appreciate that. That's why I created it.
Yeah. Our next point here is about how apparently the U.S. diplomats have begun pressing for the removal of the word gender from the United Nations documents, claiming it's politically correct language pushing an ideology.
So a lot of times people who are appointed US diplomats are know the person who is elected before they were elected. We're friends of theirs. They might be prominent rich people that organized a large donation campaign or had a bunch of dinners at their house and that sort of thing. Because diplomats have a function, but that function is really a social function. So you want somebody to be a diplomat who has some name recognition because it helps them get. I might want to talk to you because you're famous, even if I disagree with you because I'm the diplomat from North Korea or something. So a lot of the people that Trump has appointed are diplomats are his friends or people who helped raise money for him. So they share his ideology, which is an ideology that trans people don't exist, that it's something that's made up. So a lot of these diplomats are following that ideology by asking the UN to say, we don't want gender on certain documents that identify people. And again, the reason is because some people will put down that they are non-binary or trans.
Right. And it seems like they're wanting to replace replace the word gender with more specific language. Instead of saying something is gender-based violence, they want to call it violence against women, which doesn't really seem to tell the whole story.
It doesn't. And again, the point here is to ignore that these people exist.
Yeah, and I feel like you just can't simply ignore a whole demographic of people out there.
Especially not people in other nations when those nations recognize that those people exist.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it doesn't really surprise me that Trump is going against like people that we consider our allies, considering he's like sucking Kim Jong-un dick.
Right. So some of the countries that Trump's diplomats are actually targeting here are like Germany and the Philippines, who have put out documents that ask for gender. And the diplomats want those documents worded in a certain way simply to push an ideology, an agenda.
Honestly, I feel like his whole censoring of, the word gender, or at least the administration's push for this ideology that just transgender people don't exist, I feel like that's an assault on civil rights almost.
Oh, it's absolutely an assault on civil rights. Because if you can ignore that someone doesn't exist, you don't have to put money into grants that organizations who support them might go after, like an organization that keeps kids from committing suicide because they're trans, or organizations that help trans people that are in abusive relationships. Like there's women's shelters, right? But in a lot of places, there aren't trans shelters. So if you don't identify as a woman, you can't go to a women's shelter when you are in an abusive relationship. So there are other organizations that support people in those cases. Well, if you can, as the US government, ignore that trans people exist, you don't have to put money in grants that those types of organizations need in order to exist and help people.
Yeah, and this reminds me a lot of the bathroom issue. It's these people, they want to like persecute the transgender community, and they're bringing up really bad arguments to do it. Like with the bathroom issue, they're wanting to say, well, you're just going to have men that decide they feel like a woman one day and cross-dress and then go into the women's restrooms. But honestly, you hear more about men just going into women's restrooms to do their peeping Tom thing or anything like that, more so than like transgendered individuals like abusing the privilege or whatever. Like I don't know who's going in there to look into the stall of whoever or who. I don't know how they think bathrooms work, but that's just not how anything works.
Yeah, I cannot off the top of my head ever remember any news story, and I'm sure it exists, but I don't remember ever hearing any news story about a trans person going into a bathroom to peep on women. It's probably happened, but I've never heard about it. But I've heard multiple cases of men like setting up cameras in women's bathroom to watch women, use the bathroom and shower and stuff, or putting cameras on their shoes to look up women's skirts and take pictures. Those kinds of stories happen all the time. But never do I remember any of those people being trans or non-binary. So why are we punishing them for something that there's very little record of them ever doing?
Yeah, I don't know. Other than the fact that they're pushing an ideology to basically silence the LGBTQ community, especially the transgender community.
Absolutely. It's about punishment, and that's it.
So this brings us to another point, and that's how the Department of Education has stopped investigating any complaints, about abuse towards transgendered students.
So it's complaints about transgender students having bathroom rights and locker room rights removed. So, in other words, if you're trans, you want to go into a locker room with the gender that you identify with, because undressing in front of a gender that you don't identify with is uncomfortable. I mean, I can't imagine being like 14 or 15 years old and being forced to go into the women's locker room to undress. I mean, I would have been mortified. I don't know what I would have done. Or having to go into the women's bathroom to use the bathroom. I mean, I really would have freaked me out, I'm sure. What happens in a lot of these cases is that a child is trans at a school. They want to go use the bathroom in the locker room of the gender they identify with. Well, the school administrators say no, because you aren't that gender. You have to go use the gender that we say. So these complaints go up, and eventually, if they aren't handled, the federal government can get involved. What this does is this removes any protections that the Department of Education was giving to transgendered students at the local and regional level.
Right. And basically the Department of Education, I guess, namely Betsy DeVos, is hiding behind Title IX, saying that it doesn't cover transgendered students, which, I don't know, that kind of seems like a bullshit sort of argument.
It does. I don't want to go into Title IX right now, because that is a really long and deep dive. But the way that I read it is the way that the Obama administration read it. And that's that Title IX does protect trans students.
Right. And so, like, DeVos's department is saying that it prohibits discrimination based just on sex and not gender. But, I mean, at this point, like, when they were, like, talking about sex at the time, they didn't really know about gender and everything. So I feel like a correct reading of it would include, like, the complexities of gender.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the next point here that kind of shows the anti-LGBT actions of the Trump administration is the removal of transgendered protections for inmates. Is that correct?
Yes. So, in a lot of cases, it's hard for people to say, hey, inmates need equal rights, because if you're an inmate, you've been convicted of a crime. And a lot of times you've admitted to a crime. But at the same time, we have to make sure that everyone has a baseline of equality, right? We want everybody to have shelter. We want everyone to have food and water and on and on. What's going on is that the Federal Bureau of Prisons has removed a bunch of protections that transgender inmates had. They're very similar to what we talked about in our last point. So bathroom access or locker room access, that sort of thing, or who you bunk with. So let's pretend that you were an inmate in prison and you were trans and you were forced to bunk with somebody who is the opposite gender of you. Again, it would make you feel uncomfortable. I wouldn't want to bunk with a woman. I'm sure a woman wouldn't want to bunk with me. So removing this is, again, another way that the Trump administration can just ignore that trans people exist. And because these people are inmates, people in the general population are going to be less likely to stand up for them. But we have to. We have to stand up for all trans people's rights to be identified as trans.
No, I totally agree. And, these type of actions here seem to be sort of like shooting themselves in the foot, don't you think? Because
absolutely.
Because similar to the bathroom bills and everything like that, they're basically wanting to force women to use the men's bathroom. Is what it amounts to. And in this case, it would be forcing women to bunk with men and share facilities with men in prisons where there's like a high chance of being raped in that situation. So it really does put them in danger.
Absolutely. Can you imagine being stuck in prison with a bunch of men as a woman, putting them in situations that you would not want to put a woman in because it's not fair to them?
Right. And it just seems like these people are wanting to force these situations, the same situations that they're angry about. It's really kind of odd to me.
Well, it's not only that. They want to force these people to admit that they are not the gender they are simply because that's what fits the fundamentalist Christian ideology of gender.
Oh God, yeah, we could do like 4 hours just based on the Christian ideology and shit that's permeating through our government right now.
Absolutely, we could. Maybe we should.
All right, so our next point here on this Trump train is the Trump administration actually putting out a policy that denies visas to same-sex UN diplomats. Is that right?
So their defense is that it's only of unmarried diplomats. So, for instance, let's say that you were the diplomat from Bulgaria or something, and I was your boyfriend. I wasn't your husband. I was just your boyfriend. The Trump administration would deny me a visa if you wanted to come to the US and visit, simply because we're unmarried and we're same sex. If we were married, they would let us do it, or if I was a woman.
Well, I mean, would they even allow you to get married? I guess so, since the U.S. like laws and everything would apply there, right?
Right. That's a great question. I would have to go do some research on that one. I don't know. I don't know how they would feel about that. I don't know that has come up for them to have to deal with. That's a really good question.
Because I mean, it kind of feels like one of those catch-22 DMV sort of situations where it's like you got to get married in order to come over here, but we can't also let you get married. So I guess you're fucked.
Right. Honestly, this administration, it would not surprise me if they would just put pressure on your home country to remove you as a diplomat.
In the past few points, we've been talking about the transgender community, but this is more on the homosexual community. And I mean, what do you think that the ideology is right here? Just, it's not that the homosexual community doesn't exist. Is it just that they're not like the same as everybody else, I guess?
Well, I think for this fundamentalist Christian ideology, trans people don't exist and gay people should be punished for being gay, because what they'll say is you're burning in lust is the phrase they use. I believe it's from the King James version of the Bible. And since you're just burning in lust for the person and you're not married to the person, you're sinning against God. But once you're married, you have at least shown a monogamous commitment to someone, even if you're same sex. So a lot of Christians will say, well, that's at least okay that you're in a monogamous gay relationship, but we still don't like it.
I mean, they've seen Trump's track record with the whole marriage thing, right?
You know, one of my favorite memes is one I saw right after he was elected. It was a picture of Obama and Trump together in the White House when Trump came to visit. And it said, hey, guess which one has had 5 children by 3 different wives?
And no, I guess nobody would have picked the Trump card, but that was the card that you would choose.
Yeah, that is the one that you should choose.
I mean, how do you feel about the Christian, like, family-oriented, like, right that it seems to be in control of the government right now? How do you feel about them standing on top of Trump as, like, some kind of pillar of, like, family values?
You know, it's funny you ask, because I'm actually planning a very long video on answering that question partially. But there has been a long stream throughout politics since really the 1970s as the Republican Party started to change. And Reagan was the really big change in the Republican Party when they started talking about their morals and their Christian values. And in the 1990s, its peak reached the moral majority with Newt Gingrich. And Newt Gingrich is a man who served his wife divorce papers on her hospital bed as she was recovering from cancer surgery, and he was divorcing her because he was cheating on her. And at the same time, he was leading a party that was talking about that they were the moral majority and that their family values were better than the Clintons because Clinton got a blowjob in the Oval Office.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that totally did. Thank you. So the next point on our list is something that actually hits pretty close to home for me. And that's in January 2019, earlier this year, the Department of Health and Human Services approved the South Carolina governor's Governor Henry McMaster's, damn, that was hard to get out, request for a waiver allowing faith-based adoption agencies to deny services to same-sex couples. And how this hits close to home for me is that most of the adoption agencies, not including the state adoption agency here in Alabama, most of the private adoption agencies around here require some sort of faith commitment in order for you to be able to adopt from them. So that severely limits like my ability to adopt a child. But at the same time, they're passing this anti-abortion law and everything like that is going to force women to have babies that they don't necessarily want. And then they're also restricting the pool of amount of people that can adopt those babies. So it's another one of those situations where they're just sort of shooting themselves in the foot.
A lot of the Republican ideology is short-sighted. They believe in trickle-down economics. So we give a whole bunch of money to rich people and it'll trickle down to the poor people, which it doesn't. They believe in if we only have abstinence education and we don't tell kids about masturbation, we don't tell kids about contraception, they will have less sex, they will have less babies, and they will be good Christian people. That doesn't work either. So I don't understand it because the evidence, if you look at the evidence of the past, none of these conservative ideologies have worked in practice. None of them. Not a single one did what it was supposed to do. But people believe it because it's all backed by a Christian ideology. They're Christians, so they're going to fall in line and do whatever their daddy tells them.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of weird how they automatically assume Christian means good person when all throughout like the news cycles and everything like that, you always have at least one Christian doing something fucked up. And everybody that they interview is like, he was such a good Christian boy. I never expected him to tie up 3 ladies in the basement and rape them for 10 years. It's like, but he's not a good Christian boy now, is he? Seems like faith doesn't matter as far as like how good of a person you are.
Well, they believe in their objective morality and that their objective morality comes from God. And the bad news is that God doesn't exist. So since God doesn't exist, objective morality from God also doesn't exist. So, hey there, skater. Let's lock us up some girls down there in the basement and enjoy them for about 5 years. What do you say?
Yeah. And I mean, they always find some kind of loophole in it. Like, oh, I prayed to God and he told me it's all right to tie them up in the basement. Or, God says to go forth and be fruitful. So therefore I should have 25 kids. And
by women that necessarily didn't want me having sex with them. It doesn't matter because God said it was fine.
Yeah, exactly. It's so ridiculous to use faith as a judge of like character because it literally has nothing to do with how good of a person you are.
Well, and I think what we've seen is that faith leads you to pretending that some people don't exist, treating other people as if their relationships are somehow immoral, and treating children as if they're not intelligent or self-aware enough to understand who they are as people.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I feel like all of that is morally deplorable. And I find it rather odd where I'm in the position of being told that I'm an immoral person just because I don't believe in a giant deity in the sky. But, at the same time, they're out there condoning this kind of shit. Now, granted, not all Christians condone that kind of shit. I'm just talking about the ideology in general.
Right. We're talking about fundamentalist Christians here. There are plenty of Christians that this doesn't fit in with. We recognize that. The problem is that it's the fundamental Christians who are backing up Trump and pushing forward their ideology, which is vastly in the minority.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And then our final point here on our list of 10 things that Trump has done that's, anti-LGBTQ is the State Department actually appealed a ruling of a federal court judge who granted a gay couple's son citizenship. So do you want to explain to us the nuances about that?
Yes. So one of the child's father is an Israeli citizen. The other father is a U.S. citizen. So the State Department says a child born abroad must be biologically related to a U.S. citizen parent. And I'm sorry, the child was born by surrogacy in Canada. That's the other thing to remember. So the State Department saying a child born abroad, so this child was born abroad by surrogacy in Canada, must be biologically related to a U.S. citizen parent. So what they're saying is that since both parents aren't U.S. citizens, it's a loophole because one of his parents is an Israeli citizen. Therefore, they aren't going to grant the child citizenship. It's just a loophole, again, so they can punish this couple for being gay and having a child together.
Yeah, it seems like they're going out of their way to find ways to persecute the LGBTQ community and just make general life harder for them.
Absolutely. That is their way of invoking God's punishment upon them. And God is punishing them. God is punishing gay people through these ideologues for being gay and being in same-sex relationships and therefore violating the objective morality of God, an entity that doesn't exist.
Well, now hold on. I thought that God punished us with hurricanes, tornadoes, and autism. And that was because of the gays. Or mass shootings and earthquakes and other natural disasters. I thought that was God's judgment for gays.
Just today, Pat Robertson said that the earthquakes in California were God clapping for Trump's July 4th campaign rally. So I don't know. God works in mysterious ways.
Wait. God has to cause an earthquake to clap for Trump? I could think of less destructive ways to show your appreciation. How about doing one of them rainbow thingies for no goddamn reason?
Right. I mean, he was like a whole pillar of fire for the Israelites when they were in Exodus. Why couldn't he have just done that? I don't know. God just seems like kind of a dick.
Yeah. Hey, honestly, if God would have appeared in his fire bending form, over Trump on 4th of July or wherever, I seriously think they would have considered it the work of the devil, and they would have turn because Trump. I know Trump wanted to have tanks at his 4th of July thing this year. I bet you they would have ordered the tanks to fire on God.
They probably would have. They probably would have fired right up into the sky and been kill that guy, kill that brown guy. Because let's not forget Jesus was a Jew from a part of the world that would have made him very dark skinned.
Yeah, and I don't mean to insinuate too much, but the dude walked around with 12 other dudes and a prostitute, and nobody really touched the prostitute. So, I mean, I'm just saying, I don't mean to insinuate anything here, but it doesn't seem like God or Jesus really had a problem with the LGBT community.
With sausage parties? With taking the sausage from his party?
Yeah. Well, I mean, on top of that, Jesus in the New Testament never really says anything about the homosexual or LGBTQ crowd. So that's another point to make. That's less insinuate. You don't have to assume anything there.
I don't know a lot about the Bible. I'm not a former Christian or anything.
Oh,
but
really?
My favorite passage is when one of the disciples asks Jesus, or somebody asks Jesus, what the most important commandment is. And Jesus says, the only things you got to worry about are loving each other and loving God. And that's really all that matters.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of the more progressive, liberal Christians nowadays are really holding on to. And for me personally, with how much research I've done into the actual religion and everything like that, that's just how the religion changes, because it moves from one interpretation, and as society changes, it moves on to a different interpretation. So, I mean, that seems to be the future of Christianity, is just focusing on the very basic parts of the New Testament as their gospel, or their faith-based truth, I guess.
Which is how it should be. I mean, imagine if we were sitting here talking about the 10 ways that the Trump administration has supported trans people or has supported gay people. Wouldn't that be a great world to live in?
I mean, it would be, although that's not the reality we're faced with, but it would be nice.
It would be beautiful. But unfortunately, these fundamentalist Christians have their own way of interpreting the Bible, and that way of interpretation interprets a lot of hate.
It does. And I think that these 10 points give us a very solid base for considering the Trump administration to be very anti-LGBTQ, even though don't they have like a store or something where they have like Pride merch?
They do. They do. In fact, there was at one time, it was apparently deleted, but there was apparently at one time a Trump campaign video that showed just their Pride merch. And I saw it at the beginning of June, and I cannot find it again, but I saw it with my own eyes. And it was showcasing all of the Pride merch with Trump, LGBTQ, and rainbows and everything. It's all still on their store, but this was a video that showcased all of it.
Yeah, it feels oddly like the new independent fundamentalist Baptist movement, because it's like, y'all can be prideful all you want to. In the fucking closet. Get back in there, Pedro.
Right.
Oh man. Well, progressive liberal, it was great having you here. Which do you go by Ethan on your channel? Do you mind if I call you Ethan or anything?
Yeah, well, I usually I do a couple of shows on my channel. I do a live show a couple of times a week, and I just go by Ethan there. But on Twitter, most people just call me PL. So PL, progressive liberal Ethan, it all works.
Okay.
That fucking asshole on YouTube that won't shut up, that's good too.
Well, thank you, Ethan, the progressive liberal. I really appreciate you coming on the channel today to discuss this topic. A lot of people give me a lot of hate about being anti-Trump because, I always try to work that in on my Wednesday comment videos. And every single week I get somebody that's like, you really shouldn't do political topics because you suck at it. And I'm just sitting here like, look, I don't know what gave you the indication that I would have ever liked Trump. But you should know by now that I don't.
And, I want to say that when he first declared, I found it really interesting as a political scientist, that's what my degree is in. I thought it was really interesting that he was going to declare. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is somebody that never mind.
It's like, I want to give him a chance. Fuck. Right. Shouldn't have done that.
It was literally the day that he announced. I was like, okay, I'm going to give him a chance. And then I'm watching his speech, and he does the whole, they're sending the rapists and murderers. I'm like, never mind. No, never mind. Okay.
Oh, hey, did you know there are airports in the Revolutionary War? There were airports in the Revolutionary War. I did not know that.
Okay, so everyone needs to go to my channel. My wife gave me the greatest idea for a new channel banner, and it's Trump shooting eye lasers and just saying stuff about fake news, and airports is on there. I've got airports and oranges and fake news and 17 angry Democrats. Totally my wife's idea. That's my new channel banner.
Well, everybody right now should head on over to Ethan's channel. It's linked down in the description. Go there, subscribe. Just wait for all the great content to come out because he produces really great content. And Ethan, I'm so glad that you were able to come here today. Any final thoughts or words that you want to leave my audience with?
If you are a Trump supporter, I hope that you understand why there are those of us who cannot support him because of all of the things that I've outlined here today. My wife's bisexual. I have a cousin who's trans. He wants both of them to either not exist or to pretend that there's something that they're not. I can't support that, and I'll never support that.
And I have to agree with you that there's no way that I could ever support anything that Trump does, because any time that I want to reconsider it, all I have to do is listen to whatever fucking thing he said last, and then I'll be exactly. Oh yeah, I remember. He's a fucking idiot.
And the only other thing I want to say is thank you so much for having me on my channel. It really means a lot to me. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, you're doing me the favor here because this was a great list that you put together. It has a lot of great research done into it. All the relevant links that we've discussed here are going to be down in the description. So be sure to go over to Progressive Liberals channel, leave him a comment saying that GE sent you, and show him a lot of love, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, heathens, if you will, like I said before, all links are down in the description. Make sure you go down there, leave a comment on this video with what you think about Trump and his anti-LGBT practices. While you're down there, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, and I will see you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up, use your voice, and all that kind of good shit. Bye, heathens.